Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Xavier McClinton, a fourth-year economics student from Brunswick, Georgia, and the current student body president for the 2020-2021 academic school year. I have the privilege of welcoming you to this important conversation along my friend and classmate, Ms. Robin Seniors.
Thank you for those kind words, Xavier. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Robin Seniors, a fourth-year business administration student from Tallahassee, Florida, and former student body vice president. Today, Xavier and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to a robust conversation with tech industry titan and FAMU Business School alum, John Thompson. However, before that discussion, Xavier and I want to briefly talk about why we think this conversation is so important. Xavier, why don't you begin with your thoughts?
This conversation is so important to me for a couple of different reasons. I think when you look at the past couple of months, you've seen that CEOs and business leaders across the country, like John Thompson, have made a distinct impact on the social direction of this country. Companies like Microsoft, JP Morgan, Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits, and many others have really stepped up to the plate to fight systematic injustice and racial discrimination in this nation that we call home.
Exactly. But to get into those positions of leadership, you have to prepare now. That reminds me of our Dean Friday Stroud's favorite quote, "Luck is when preparation meets opportunity." And I'm a firm believer, and Xavier, I think you will agree, that FAMU has greatly prepared us to exceed in the academic and social space. As you know, I served as the student body vice president my sophomore year. In that capacity, I was introduced to a myriad of people that connected me to a wide array of things. But also, more importantly, SBI, the School of Business and Industry, created by our founding dean, Dean Mobley, has prepared me greatly academically to excel. I'm excited to announce that I will be taking a full-time position at headquarters at JP Morgan in New York City upon graduation. But I couldn't have done that if SBI hadn't molded me into the person I am today. The academic rigor, the PLD courses that have, shaped who I am with my soft skills, as we like to talk about, has all made me who I am, the kind of, shark that they want us to be in business. So I'm forever thankful and grateful for the opportunities that FAMU has given me, how they've molded me and poured into me in my success. But as you were talking about, the CEOs we've seen and business leaders have a profound impact on the social direction of this country. So I have a question for you. More than the motivation that stems from wanting to get into positions of leadership like that enable you to enact, social change, what motivates you to excel?
I think for me, what motivates me to excel is kind of twofold. I think you have the intrinsic motivation and some of the intrinsic stuff. And when I talk about intrinsic motivation, I think about how personally I want to succeed, to be able to help others and be fulfilled in the work that I do. I think oftentimes you see a lot of business leaders and even student leaders climb the ladder to gain power, access, money, or whatever it may be, and they do this selfishly. But I've always been really amazed at those selfless leaders that do it the right way and constantly find new ways to positively impact not only their communities, but their state and their country as well. I've been blessed when we talk about the external environments that motivate me, to have people in my life that really want to see me do well and have really sacrificed a lot to get me here. And so part of that, and one of my biggest fears, honestly, is letting them down. And so I've turned that fear into motivation, and it's helped me excel in 4 prestigious internships before senior year, and then has helped me kind of land this full-time job with Wells Fargo Securities in their investment bank in New York. So really excited to that, and really looking forward to continuing to push FAMU and being a good example for the FAMU generations that come after me.
I couldn't agree more, Xavier, and I'm excited that we'll both be working on Wall Street together and have each other as a support system in New York. Again, you can see that FAMU really does create a network for young professionals to have a support system and exceed when they go out into the corporate world. And today we have the unique privilege to hear from an amazing example for FAMU students and alumni, and that is SBI alum John Thompson. As we all know, Mr. Thompson currently serves as the chairman of the board for Microsoft Corporation. But previously, he also served as the CEO of Virtual Instruments, Vice President at IBM, and former CEO of Symantec. John also received a graduate degree from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, better known as MIT. In addition to that, Mr. Thompson was appointed to sit on the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission in 2009. All I have to say is, wow, we are truly standing on the shoulders of giants. I am greatly looking forward to hearing his insight on how to maneuver the corporate world as a young professional. What were his greatest lessons from his years in corporate leadership? His thoughts on what needs to be done to create a more diverse workspace in corporate America, and where he believes the tech space will evolve in the coming years. What about you, X? What are you excited to hear him speak about?
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear him talk about not only his experience and what he thinks really set him apart moving as a FAMU graduate, because it's always great and really energizing for me to see somebody who stood in the same hallways, lived in the same dorms, and walked the same campus go out and do the things that I'm looking to do 20, 30 years down the road. But I'm super excited to hear about that. But I also think that before we go there, I think we need to transition into something that I'd like to talk, and that's about the importance of voting. As many of you know, we've got election days coming up on November 3rd and opportunities to vote early before that. And as Student Government Association president, one of the big things that we're pushing for right now is our Strike the Vote campaign. Yesterday, we observed National Voter Registration Day and had a big celebration with Dr. Robinson, Oscar Joyner, I'm forgetting a couple of names here, but we had a big celebration yesterday just to really highlight and to emphasize how important it is for Rattlers and young people to get out and vote and be registered to vote, and to encourage their friends and family members to do the same as well. I think that this past summer has been one that's really opened our eyes to a lot of things and has really started conversations that haven't been had in a long time. And so I think that now is the opportunity, and it's definitely the chance for us to go and put some action behind those words, those conversations, and those movements.
I completely agree, Xavier. And as a former student body vice president, I couldn't be more proud of the work you're doing this year to lead a nonpartisan voter registration effort. I have to take a personal point of privilege to thank FAMU for all the connections that they have given me. And because of that, I've been able to serve as the national co-chair for HBCU Students for Biden. For the Biden-Harris campaign, and it's been one of the best experiences of my lifetime. And from Kamala Harris to John Thompson, I think we can all agree that an HBCU education is not a second-tier education, because HBCUs are creating the movers and shakers of this world.
Well, let's strike the vote in November. And again, thank you all for attending this event.
We are greatly looking forward to the valuable insights we will all gain from this conversation. And now I will pass it to our president, Dr. Larry Robinson.
Yeah, thank you very much. One of the toughest things to do is to follow a FAMU student, but in this case, it's become between FAMU students and an outstanding alum in the nature of John Thompson, but I'm gonna give it a shot this afternoon. So it is an honor for me to speak to you today at this virtual symposium. A view from the top, and boy, that's certainly appropriate today. A conversation with John W. Thompson, John Wendell Thompson, literally the chairman of the board. I want to thank Ms. Cheryl Howard Booker and the FAMU Industry Cluster for providing this opportunity for us to co-sponsor with them this series of vital conversations we plan to have. And I don't think we could have started any better than where we are now with the chairman of the board. So in my mind, you've heard about the chairman's, former, accomplishments in the world of work. And what it does to me is sort of, focus this symposium around what I think is really is, and that is, it's about excellence. As our motto says, in fact, it's about excellence with caring. So it's no secret, as you just heard, that HBCUs for a very long time produced outstanding talent, and it's great to see others beginning to recognize that. It's no secret that Fordham University is ranked the highest public HBCU in the nation, according to U.S. News and World Report's 2021 Best College Rankings of Top public universities, it is no secret that FAMU ranked 117 among these top public universities, moving up 6 spots from 123 just a year ago. And all of these things are wonderful, and they measure, in my opinion, what we're really all about. They put a focus on, student success outcomes. And those are really, really the reasons why we're here, promoting and creating that next generation of outstanding graduates. But I like to reemphasize, as I've said many times, where these measures are important, graduation rates, retention rates, students finding jobs, good jobs in a timely fashion and finding them in the right disciplines and so forth. But I think ultimately the best measure of a university is what the graduates do over the course of their lives, right? What do they leave the university and do? What type of difference do they make when they enter into the world? And we've seen tremendous examples of rattlers making a difference in the world, from the likes of Keisha Lance Bottoms in Atlanta and, Melvin Carter, in St. Paul, Minnesota, and other places around the world. We see rattlers taking on the biggest challenges of the day and creating tremendous opportunities. I think the speaker for today really exemplifies that in the best possible way. And it really tells the story of Florida A&M University and helps, I think, make my point that, from Florida A&M University, from the highest of the 7 hills in Tallahassee, you can get anywhere. It's hard to measure the impact of a rattler over a 4-year period, a 5 or 6 year period. When you integrate the impacts of rattlers over the lifetime, you would be amazed at the things that we're doing. And that includes the speaker today, John Thompson. We like to call him the son of the soil. He has made FAMU very, very proud with his life as an executive and his service to make this world better. He is an example of what FAMU is all about, making a difference in the lives of others and sharing his views from the top. But not only that, I just want to point out to you too that John Wendell Thompson has made the largest individual gift to Florida A&M University in our history. And that is notable as well. He understands that as we graduate from this place and go out into the world and achieve all these great things, for FAMU to be here, to be open for that next generation of John Thompson, we have to put some skin in the game. John Thompson has put a lot of skin in the game, and I really want to thank you publicly again for your generosity towards Florida A&M University. Thank you for sharing with us today what you will. And I encourage you, which I know I don't have to, but I do it anyway, keep striking from the top. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Shall we go into our fireside chat?
Sure, why not?
All right, let's do it.
Let's do this.
I'm really glad to be here with you as well. I'm Laura Morgan Roberts. I am a professor at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business. UVA is my undergraduate alma mater. But that said, I've always had tremendous admiration and respect for the leadership and the legacy of FAMU and especially SBI. And so I consider it such an honor and a privilege to be able to do anything affiliated with FAMU, but especially to join you in this conversation today. We so appreciate this precious time together. We have a set of questions that I know everyone is eager to engage with you around, John. So let's just get started. As Xavier and Robin have already reminded us, we are at a critical juncture in our society. And we are dealing with the ongoing implications of injustice and unrest in so many different dimensions of life right now: public health, education, government, policing, the judiciary, of course, in our workplaces as well. What are the conversations that you have been having in recent days with other corporate leaders about this moment in history? And what are some of the conversations that you all are having at Microsoft in your boardroom? In particular, where should we focus and what should our action steps be at this point?
Well, that's a very topical issue, as you can probably imagine. But to be clear, we're at a point where this is not about what the government does to move things along. This is about what we as individuals and business leaders in every community around the country stands up and says, this is what has to happen if we're going to create a more inclusive workforce and a more inclusive country. While we have some divisive issues perhaps stemming from the top, at the core, there's always going to be some split, if you will, in this country, given the history of the country. But there's more that can be done that can bring us together. And I think leaders in corporate America are the ones that are going to drive this, not governmental leaders, because they are too volatile. They change their jobs every 4 to 8 years, and therefore, how can they have sustained change when the same leader's not in it for a very, very long period of time to create a standard culture, which is what companies and organizations do. So my view of the world is that change is going to come when the business community of this country stands up and says, time out, we've had enough. It's time to do things differently. And I think that's certainly been the dialogue that I've not only had with Microsoft, but had with a number of other companies that are going through a similar situation where they're trying to determine, how do I do a better job of creating a more inclusive culture? Candidly, in the tech sector, in the life science sector, many of these, we are way below where we need to be. And while we've made progress over the last few years, we're still way below where we need to be. And so help needs to be given to HBCUs and every other community in the country where African American people or people of color live who need a shot at a job in tech. And that's where the real opportunity, I think, comes from. I got lucky. I never expected to be in tech some 49 years ago. But lo and behold, IBM offered me a job because I was a salesman. And lo and behold, life worked out okay for me.
Can we follow up on this a little bit?
Sure.
We'll get into the chapters of your career. I have one follow-up question about your call to action that you used in opening. Now, we know that corporations have spent billions of dollars on diversity and inclusion initiatives. Let's think over the past 50 years from the time since you left FAMU and your career evolved and ascended. We talked about equal opportunity. We've talked about affirmative action. We've talked about going global. We've talked about diversity of thought and team decision making. We've talked about the power of inclusion and belonging and bringing our whole selves to work, which many constituents in the tech sector really loved and drove that conversation in some interesting ways. And now we're at a point in which we seem to have a disconnect between the investment, the attention, and the impact, particularly when it comes to these long-standing disparities in representation and quality of work experience for Black professionals. Still less than 3% of all CEOs, less than 3% of all senior executives across industries, and only 8% of managers. So we're underrepresented, and we've had a 50-year history of trying to tackle some of these issues and challenges. What have we been missing? What can we do differently now?
I think success is about sustained focus. And what has happened over the years is we made great progress in the 70s and 80s. And oh, by the way, things started to slow down a little bit and we felt representation was okay. Well, it wasn't okay. It was just better than it was 20 years earlier. And what we're now coming to realize is we just didn't do enough. We didn't put enough focus on this every single day. And I think if you're going to bring about change, change only comes from sustained, disciplined focus on what you're trying to get done. And clearly, this is a problem that needs to be addressed because it is about creating opportunities for everyone in our country, not just people who have, let's say, a preferred shot at a school of some great discipline or quite frankly, have a different ethnic background than you or I might have.
Wondering how we engage around resistance to those initiatives. When we're talking that sustained change in the commitment, there's a bit of a push and pull, right? And even in recent days, we're hearing things like, don't teach anti-racism in schools. Don't talk about systemic racism or historical perspectives in corporate trainings. You know, so there's always a push and pull.
I'm sorry. Just don't buy that. If this is about change, change is about a leader standing up and taking a position. It's not about following the conventional wisdom, if you will, or the float of what's going on in the world right now. And so what we need right now are real leaders who are going to stand up and say, I believe that I have to change. That's why, quite frankly, I'm so proud of what Satya has done at Microsoft. Satya made it very clear that he was going to double the African-American workforce over the next 5 years. He's going to double the leadership over the next 5. Now, that's a bold statement. And oh, by the way, to double, that is a tremendous platform to spring from, given, candidly, the scarcity of the talent pool altogether. So the combination of a scarce talent pool in the face of doubling your workforce in that particular category, that is an amazing challenge. Let's see how he does. Believe me, I'll be monitoring this regularly.
We have to get to that question about the scarcity of the talent pool, because that's been a hot button issue over the past 48 hours. But also to mention, one of the unusual things that Satya does at Microsoft is to link CEO compensation to these metrics. So it's not just setting the goals, but also holding himself accountable, holding the organization accountable. And I can't help but acknowledge the critical role that a board plays here in ensuring the accountability to that commitment.
Well, diversity and inclusion is one of the elements that's in the senior leadership compensation model at Microsoft. And they recognize that if they don't perform relative to the expectations they have in that particular category, guess what? It will impact their comp. And I'm proud to say that the team has done well over the last few years. But as I said earlier, we have got a long way to go. Make no mistake about that.
Yeah. Well, let's, if we may, get more into these questions of personal leadership. So you clearly have a lot of compassion and conviction around who leaders should be, what leaders should do. We'd love to hear about how you developed your perspective and your skills and leverage various opportunities at different points in your career. I've heard you talk about chapters in your career. We'd love for you to start at your 21-year-old John Thompson self.
Wow.
What are some of the things that you would say are some important insights and reflections that you would have even at that very early stage of your career?
Well, as some may know, I sold stereo equipment my last 2.5 years when I was at FAMU at a little place called Stereo Sales at I guess it was the mall or a shopping center just south of campus, if you will. And I learned to be a salesman. And ironically enough, when the IBM team came on campus, the notion was, John, you ought to go and interview. They were looking for salespeople. I went, look at me. I got the world's biggest afro and a big beard and mustache. I don't wear blue suits or white shirts. Why could I could never do that. I went anyway at the strong suggestion of the guy who led outplacement services. And lo and behold, I met with the sales manager who interviewed me for the job, and he wanted to buy a stereo system. And lo and behold, I started selling. And while he didn't hire me into Tallahassee, he did say, you ought to join IBM. That was the last thing I ever thought about doing, because I had no interest, quite frankly, in tech at all. But I did have interest in sales. And so I thought, well, why not? I'll do this for 2 years and then I'll go to law school. And about 18 months in, I sat down with my father-in-law, who was a very prominent attorney in West Palm Beach, and started to explain to him why I wanted to go to law school and why I thought it would be the right career option for me. And so he says, okay, let me ask you a few questions. He says, now you've got a kid with one on the way, right? Right. He says, and how much money do you make now? And the answer was about $10,000, $11,000. And he says, okay, and how much money do you think you're going to be making in 2 years? I went, oh my gosh, in 2 years, I'm going to be making 2-3 times that. And he says, really? I went, really? And he says, and in 5 years? I said, oh, well, 5 years, I won't be the leader of the company, but I'll certainly have a bigger job. He went, really? I went, really? And he says, well, why would you ever leave that job to go to law school? Because 3 years in, when you're done, you're going to make about the same amount of money you make now. And if you really do think you could make that much more money in 2 years, why bother? And literally, it was that encouragement by a very prominent and successful attorney that convinced me that I should stay in the sales organization at IBM. And I got lucky. I had a bunch of people that embraced me, became my advisor and coach and mentor, or whatever you want to call it. And my career just blossomed after I finally committed myself to becoming a part of the team of IBM, which is a very different cultural experience, quite frankly, than anything I'd ever had before that, for sure.
One of the biggest challenges that all professionals face of any background is making that transition from individual contributor to manager or leader. Linda Hill at Harvard Business School writes about how this forms an identity crisis because you build your career off of your competence and your expertise. So you've differentiated yourself as this phenomenal salesperson, and then you're rewarded for that success with a management role or an assignment. And all of a sudden, you have to learn a brand new set of skills very, very quickly to get things done through other people. What was that transition like for you? What did you do to help yourself become more capable and more equipped as a manager? And what are some of the things that you're telling young managers now that they need to be aware of as they're moving into this new stage of their career?
Well, one of the things that probably was most influential in my staying at IBM for 27 years, 9 months, and 13 days was that they had unbelievable development programs. So if you were a sales rep, the amount of time you spent 18 months in training before you got a territory. Once you became a manager, the number of training programs that you went through in preparation for becoming an effective manager was quite disciplined, quite frankly. You would go to classes over a course of a 18-month period so you could become a more effective manager, just as you became a more effective salesperson, if you will. And so a lot of what helped me was candidly the programmatic activities that IBM had in place and some of my early mentors. I was fortunate enough to have a guy named Ed McGinnis, who had been a HR person for many, many years, who decided to come back because he didn't want to be in HR anymore to lead the branch that I was in, and he took me under his wing. I got offered a job in Boston and got told by an African-American leader there, don't take this job. I took it anyway, and guess what? Another guy put his arm around my neck and made me the most successful staff guy he'd ever seen, which ultimately led to a branch job, where it became the #1 branch in the country that led to them selecting me to go to MIT Sloan. So all of it was about the relationships that I built as I worked my way through my career. And if you weren't willing to build relationships with people who didn't look like you back in those days, guess what? You weren't going to have any career success at all.
We're still seeing that in the data currently about the experiences of aspiring and accomplished Black professionals often feeling disconnected from those high impact developmental relationships, disconnected from those informal networking circles where the backstory is being shared in the meeting before the meeting or the meeting after the meeting, where you're having the download and you're getting the feedback and you're getting the intel that you need to just be more effective with your clients and with your coworkers. And part of what we see is the burden and the weight of stereotyping and microaggressions and a lot of the injustices that lead Black people to feel less safe and less valued at work. also leads them to be more guarded, right? So if you don't feel safe, you're going to be more on your guard. So they say, I'm just going to put my head down and get my work done, and they'll see my great work. And then I don't have to worry about these politics. I don't have to worry about those, those beers and the coffee hours. What do you say to them, John, when they think that they're letting their work speak for themselves? Why is this other element so important for developing your career, especially if you are not the prototype?
Well, look, having a successful career is fundamentally about your knowledge and insight of the career you've chosen. In other words, if you choose a career in tech, then you better learn something about tech if you want to be good at that career you've chosen. However, equally as important is creating a team connection, because it's that team connection that you create that helps you to learn from mistakes that you made or mistakes that others have made, helps you gain insights about success or failures that others have had that would help you as you move along. And so having all of the right skills and experience are very, very important and critical to career success. But building a team where you are a part of the team, where people are willing to share with you insights that are helpful to you, that's what career success is all about. Not simply about putting your head down and just getting the job done. Because if that's all you do, that's where you stay, at that desk for the rest of your career.
Can you think about a time when you had to make yourself vulnerable, when you had to just raise your hand and say, hey, I don't know. Can you, fill me in on this?
Well, I don't know that I can pick any time in my career when I was more vulnerable than not. Perhaps the most critical moment in my career was when I finally made the decision to leave IBM and join Symantec. I had had a very successful IBM career for a very long time, but I realized I'm never going to get to run this company. And while I may be on the list to run the company, I'm second or third or fourth on the list, not first on the list. And therefore, if I want to run a company, and I thought I had learned enough from all the years of experience that I'd had, if I want to run a company, I'm going to have to leave. And that was a very, very hard decision, because I grew up in a family where my parents were committed and loyal to their jobs and their careers, not moving around as we do today from company to company. It's a very, very different environment and structure. And so when I made the decision, candidly, the most important person in that process was my wife. Because after getting a proposal from the company on a Sunday morning, I analyzed the proposal and decided I'm not going to take this job. I am not going to take this job. And it was all about a couple of stock options and the leverage that would come from the stock options. And so I literally tore up the contract and threw it in the trash, sent my attorney a note and said, I'm out. And that night as we went to bed, sure enough, Sandy said to me, I never thought this was all about money. I went, what are you talking about? She says, I always thought you were pursuing this to be able to practice the craft, to be able to show the experience that you gained. And you tell me this is about money? And I literally said, oh my gosh, I didn't quite think about it that way. And I got up from the bed, went downstairs, called my lawyer. He faxed me a new contract. I signed it. And the next day I announced to IBM I was leaving. And had she not said to me, put your focus on the opportunity, not the end result. Because if you don't focus on the opportunity, you won't achieve the end result that you want. And it worked out okay, needless to say.
Yeah. We're so thankful to know that you held steadfast on that purpose and with that clarity throughout your journey, and blazing trails in many places that other people who look like you and maybe thought like you had not led. Now, also you came out of FAMU, right? I grew up in Gary, Indiana in the 1980s. And when I grew up in Gary, Indiana in the 1980s, pretty much everybody in power you could think of was Black. So it wasn't a question for me as to whether or not Black people could or should lead. It was just something that I always held within my spirit because that was the world in which I lived. Structural inequality aside, which is a whole nother conversation, sure. But there is power in understanding how Black institutions help to develop and advance Black leaders. Can you help our attendees today understand a little bit more of that from your perspective? How did FAMU shape your career? What is the role of HBCUs today in helping to develop and advance Black leaders?
Well, I think every institution, be it an HBCU or any who is training a young employer or employee, has got to be focused on how do I make that person better than they were when they arrived here? How do I make him or her more effective at what he or she is trying to get done? And I think the programmatic initiatives that many institutions have help, but ultimately success, career success is, again, I'll go back to, it's about the team. It's about the people, the support system that you build around yourself as you're trying to advance your career. And if you don't build an adequate support system, candidly, your career falls a little short. And all too often, some of us who have pretty big egos let our ego get in the way of what our potential is. And I argue success in many, many early stages of your career are more about humility than this notion of, I want to show that I am strong and powerful and can lead someday. No, humility is an important way for people to recognize, gee, I like that person. He or she can talk and communicate with me in a way that is comfortable to me and to him. And that humility is what creates the connections. And candidly, my career success, the modest amount of success I've had, has been all about career connections, the ability to connect with people throughout every step along the way. And if you don't do that, you won't get there.
So you've made a choice to continue to be connected and engaged with FAMU. Why is that ongoing connection important for you? And what kinds of partnerships should other corporate leaders consider right now in terms of how they can remain connected to and supportive of FAMU and other HBCUs?
Well, I owe a great deal of my career and life success to FAMU and Sybil Mobley and all the people who were so influential in my career or my development as a young person. And I'd never walk away from FAMU, quite frankly, because I owe them everything. But by the same token, the number of requests, the number of opportunities to engage is phenomenal these days. And so I just have to put my hands out and say there are only a few organizations that I'm going to engage with that are non-public. FAMU is one of them, MIT is another, and candidly, the things that my wife and I do for kids in underserved communities, those are the places where we spend our time on, quote, non-profit oriented activities. But ultimately, it's a very, very important experience that I had at FAMU, and it's the foundation of my life, quite frankly.
Yeah, so
my mom got her master's at FAMU. I can remember my sister went to Howard. I had gone to Lincoln in Missouri for a year, and I then wanted to go to Howard, and my mom thought I was too wild to go to Howard. So she says, no, you're going to FAMU. And I went to FAMU, and the rest is history.
That's really cool. And you've also then continued to make some important choices about how you want to have impact with the power and with the resources that you've attained just from that standpoint of service and really making a difference. And, you know, this seems an important moment in history for everybody to ask ourselves that very question. You know, what matters to me? What do I have to give from whatever my position is? And how can I best channel the resources that I have to align with those commitments and the passion that would allow me to have the impact that's needed. A lot of corporate leaders are getting criticized right now. Let's just be honest, right? They're saying, oh, this is just virtue signaling. You're just making donations, throwing money out there at the problem, but you're not truly invested in making that systemic change. So, that's a hot button issue on the table, but you have a track record of already giving and leading in this space, which is why it's so important for us to hear your voice on these matters right now.
Well, I think at the end of the day, we have to do a better job within our community of extending out to where the opportunities are emerging. Candidly, I'm really disappointed when I look and see how few people of color, be they Black, Hispanic, or whatever, focus on tech. And guess what? That is one of the job opportunities for everyone in this country, not just in a tech company, but as many have said, every company is becoming a tech-dependent company. And therefore, if we're going to have successful careers independent of the industry, we're going to have some foundational understanding and insight into technology. And I think more and more and more has to be done there. And that's why I've encouraged Microsoft and many other companies to get more involved with HBCUs, get more involved with local communities where you can, in fact, drive tech insights. So you open the aperture for job opportunities for people of color.
Yeah. That's great. Can you help us to think a little more about what a multi-stakeholder approach would be in addressing that issue? Like how corporate policies factor in, how do federal, state, local policies factor in? We know that these are complex issues.
Candidly,
right?
I don't care about state and local policies. As I said from the very beginning, change in this arena is going to come from business leaders standing up and saying, this is the way it must be done. Because, oh, by the way, it's about building an effective workforce. And if we don't have an open and inclusive workforce, we have a huge, huge problem to deal with. And so I argue this is not about Donald Trump or whoever the next president might be. This is not about the governor of Florida or the governor of Georgia. This is about the leaders of those businesses in those communities that hire all the people. They hire 80% of the people. So they ought to be the ones standing up and saying, we need a more open and more inclusive culture. We need a more open and inclusive environment. And therefore, here's what I'm going to do as a leader to make sure that happens.
And what do we say to those who argue we just can't find any?
You want to know the real word?
Whatever word you choose, John, whatever word you choose.
It starts with a B and ends with a T. That's just not true. It's just not true. If in fact someone is focused and intent, you can accomplish the outcome that you set out to accomplish, period. But you have to be focused, and you cannot get swayed or distracted or whatever along the way. I mean, candidly, for me, that's the outcome of my career. Focus. Every time I got a job, I knew that IBM had a career path where you could look 2 steps ahead to your boss's job. And if I could see that in my portfolio, then I was striving to that. And so for every year I got a new job, every 2 years when I got a new job, I would always say, I want my boss's job. I never said I wanted to be CEO. I wanted the next job up so I could feel the progress of career progression. And I think all of us need to think in that context. Oftentimes people will say, well, what do you want to do? And says, well, I want to be CEO. I said, no. I didn't ask you what you wanted to be. I asked you what you wanted to do. And I think more and more and more of us need to focus on just that, the fundamentals of what we do and how well we execute.
How did corporate governance play a role for you? Obviously, that has been part of your career evolution, and it's also been a topic on the agenda right now, or I should say under scrutiny for many corporations who are coming out and saying, we support the development of a truly inclusive workforce. People say, okay, look at your C-suite, but then they also say, now let's look at your board. Is there anything that we should keep in mind about that?
Well, interestingly enough, my first corporate board was NIPSCO, or NiSource, in Northwest Indiana.
I know NIPSCO.
I had been involved with them where they were a client, and the guy who was about to become the CEO had been the president and said, you know, we need someone on the board who has tech background and experience because we're making some big moves on the tech front. And I'm told that IBM allows some of its people to join boards. So could you give me some names? And so I went to the IBM people and they gave me a list of names, and I went back to the CEO a few weeks later and said, here's the list of names. And I talked him through them, and he looked at it. He says, you missed it. I went, what do you mean I missed it? He says, we want you. I went, no. I can't do this. I'm your provider from IBM. I can't be on your board. And he went, no, we got a way to handle that. And when things come up with IBM on it, we'll parse you off and we'll deal with it. And that was the first corporate board I joined. And about a year or two into that experience, I came to the realization, my gosh, here are lots of people around the table with all the epaulets on their shoulders that say president, CEO, chairman, and I don't have any of those epaulets, but they don't know that much more than I do. And so if they can have the epaulets, why can't I have the epaulets? And that was the aha moment for me to say, it's time for me to start to think about becoming a CEO, not just becoming the head of sales for some big organization like IBM. And I think all of us, hopefully all of us, have those moments in our career. I got fortunate to have it early enough to where the influence of that board shaped what happened to me next, not just from a governance perspective, but from a career perspective.
One last question for now, though I'm sure there are so many other questions based on what you've sparked today. So we know that Robin and Xavier are FAMU student leaders, and they're going to JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo and, you know, launching their careers, as are many others, and we're so excited and thrilled for them. Any specific words of advice for them as to how they can make the most of the very early stages of their careers and help to find their own purpose and their own paths?
Well, I think it's awfully important when you join an organization that you determine whether or not the culture of that organization and you are aligned. Do they have a value system that is aligned with mine? Do they have a way in which they help to develop me and my professional career that's helpful to me long term? And I think if those things exist, then it becomes a place that you want to stay. And that's candidly why I stayed at IBM as long as I did, that the value system of the company was one that I could align with. And I think that question has to be asked every time. The challenge, I think, in today's world is that the turn cycle in careers and companies is much different than when I came up. When I came up, you would spend 25, 30 years with a company. Now, candidly, in the tech sector alone, the average time in a given company is about 2 to 3 years. And so what you're doing is building a career about a life experience, not just a company experience. And that's pretty important, because as you switch from company to company, guess what? You're switching from culture to culture too, because every company, every organization has its own culture. And if you can't blend in, you're not going to advance. And so it's a really interesting phenomenon for everyone to deal with, but you have to become a part of it if you want to succeed.
Wow. I think you have your marching orders laid out for you, and we've also gotten so many robust insights from your story, from your leadership insight and your wisdom and conviction as just a dynamic, service-oriented human being. We're just thrilled to be able to hear from you and engage with you in this way. And we thank you once again for all of your generous contributions. I'd now like to invite in Cheryl Harris, who is going to put forth more to all of us by way of call to action.
Hey, thanks, Laura. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Cheryl Harris, Chief Procurement Officer and Senior Vice President at Allstate, and I serve as Chair of the Florida A&M Industry Cluster. I've been affiliated with FAMU since 1984, first as a student, then of course as an alumni, and now as a champion for everything that FAMU represents. John and Laura, all I can say is thank you for today's powerful discussion. Laura, your questions were on point, and John, as always, thank you for keeping it real with 600 plus of your new best friends. The discussion was both insightful and amazing. Now, here are a few salient points that I'm taking away. First, leaders take bold steps. Second, if you're focused and rooted in intent, you can deliver the results you're looking for. Third, networking and being connected is key. Next is there is a difference between what we want to do as compared to what we want to be. And for students, make sure you assess and reflect on the culture of the organization you're joining, ensuring your value system aligns with theirs.
Well said.
I want to pause to thank Dr. Robinson, our student presenters, FAMU faculty, administrators, students, alumni, lawmakers, corporate partners, and special invited guests for joining us. We appreciate you investing your time to hear from John and Laura, and importantly, to learn about the impact that Florida A&M had in shaping the one, the only John Thompson. Now, society has been rooted in a fundamental belief that people should be treated equal, or that we need to provide fair and equal access to all. But ladies and gentlemen, treating people the same when they are not all starting from the same point is not enough. I've known that to be true, but we can see it more clearly now based on everything that's happening around us. Let me share an excerpt from a blog that I read last month, and I think it will help you understand what I mean. And the blog was focused on outlining the difference between equity and equality. The blog read, equity is defined as the state, quality, or ideal of being just, impartial, and fair. The concept of equity is synonymous with fairness and justice. It is helpful to think of equity as not simply a desired state of affairs or a lofty value. To be achieved and sustained, equity needs to be thought of as a structural and systemic concept. Now, when we look at equity versus equality, equity involves trying to understand and give people what they need to enjoy full, healthy lives. Equality, in contrast, aims to ensure that everyone gets the same in order to enjoy full, healthy lives. Like equity, equality aims to promote fairness and justice, but it can only work if everyone starts from the same place and needs the same things. But we are all not starting from the same place. And this is where all of us on this call and those that we are connected with need to play a role. So here I have a call to action. As you reflect on today's discussion and everything that's happening around you, from COVID to what's happening with Breonna Taylor today, to shootings by police officers, to even what we see is unjust treatment within corporations. I'm asking you to pause, take a minute, reflect, and assess. And after you do that, ask what have you done and what else you can do in the fight for equity. As John said, it's up to each and every one of us to create a more inclusive society. Microsoft and other corporations are stepping up to the challenge. Now, each of us needs to not only think about what we need to do, we need to act and actually do. As Xavier said at the top of the call, we need to all remember to vote. Make sure you're registered and make sure your friends and family members are also registered. We all have to use the power each of us have to drive the change that we want to see. Corporate leaders, corporate partners, I ask that you serve as an ally, mentor, or sponsor, or all of the above, to the Black employees within your organizations. John talked about the impact of leadership development programs, in the years that he was rising. So make sure your organizations have high impact programs for your Black employees. They're not starting from the same point. Support your Black employee resource groups and ensure that you have diverse recruiting slates and diverse succession pipelines. This is where a relationship with FAMU, I'm a bit biased, can serve you well, but I submit, please reach out to any other HBCU if you find that they are in your geographic footprint. Positive change and closing the wealth gap will take a village. Support FAMU, other HBCUs, and nonprofits that are focused on equity, as these organizations need financial resources to ensure we can continue to support the education of students like Robin and Xavier. Alumni, my family, reflect on everything that FAMU has provided to you. Give back to support the education of those coming behind us. I was a beneficiary of those gifts, and we all have an obligation to pay it forward. Students, focus on getting as much education as you can and live into becoming the great leaders you have the potential to become. Network and stay connected. As John said, being connected is invaluable. Parents that are on the call, please, please, please support your children in their quest to become leaders and positive change agents in the world. They all have the potential to be the next John Thompson. Lawmakers, please understand the needs of the constituents you serve and ensure you're serving them based on what they need and how they need to be supported versus treating them equally. Faculty and administrators, continue to live into FAMU's model of excellence with caring. Through amplification of this focus, you will ensure FAMU sustains its place as a destination for talented students, talented faculty, and organizations like ours to recruit and continue to invest our resources. Now, I haven't covered all the constituents on the call, but I've attempted to give you some ideas. So what will you do? Let me ask it differently. What bold actions will you take? Change is about leaders stepping up to take a position. This is what real leaders do. And that was a quote from John Thompson. Leaders ensure they have sustained disciplined focus. Yet another quote. I consider each and every person on the call today a leader. What you do is up to you. So what will it be? My ask is that you document at least one thing you're going to do yet this week to change the course for equality. And then document another thing that you're going to do next week and yet another the following week. And by the time we convene again before the end of the year, you will be proud to share all the actions that you've personally taken to drive change. So with that, I'm excited. We're ending on time. Again, I want to thank the ladies and gentlemen that helped us put on today's event. We could not have done it without you. You are so greatly appreciated. So with that, I'll say thank you. Have a great afternoon. Stay safe. And again, go FAMU.